Hello, my dears. I'm Margaret, but you can call me Grandma Maggie. I'm well into my 80s now, but some memories still feel as vivid as ever. On that summer afternoon in 1958, something happened that I want to share with you, not just as a family secret, but as a warning. I hope you'll stay with me until the end of this story. But before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. I love hearing that. And if you can, please give this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss other stories like this one. Now, make yourselves comfortable because this is one of those hard to believe tales. When I married Charles in 1956, I was an innocent 20-year-old girl just out of my parents' home with bright eyes full of hope for a happy future. Charles was a reserved man, almost 10 years older, but his serious demeanor felt reassuring. After the wedding, he bought a house on Magnolia Street, an old red brick building with tall windows, a spacious yard, and a basement that curiously was always locked. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Charles said the basement housed dangerous tools and that an accident could happen if I meddled where I shouldn't. Foolish as I was, I accepted his explanation, but it didn't take long before small signs began to appear. Sometimes at night I could swear I heard muffled noises, something like a low moan followed by soft footsteps. Charles said it was just the wind, but on some nights I could hardly close my eyes, my heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards. Back then, a good wife was supposed to trust her husband without question. So I swallowed my doubts, convincing myself I was just influenced by the neighborhood stories. I had no idea that the secret of that basement was far darker than I could ever imagine. You'd be suspicious too, wouldn't you? Marrying Charles felt like a dream come true. He was tall, with neatly styled brown hair and deep eyes, always dressed in impeccable suits, just like the actors in the movies that played on Sundays at the town cinema. We met in 1955 during a picnic organized by the local church. I, wearing my blue polka dot dress and wide-brimmed hat, was more focused on balancing the tray of lemonade than talking to any boy. But Charles was different. His polite manners and carefully chosen words captivated me with an unsettling ease. A year later, we married in a simple ceremony at the same church where we met. White flowers decorated the pews, and my mother wept softly, clutching the lace handkerchief that had belonged to my grandmother. After the celebration, we moved into the house on Magnolia Street, and it was there that the perfect life I had imagined began to show its cracks. In the first few months, everything seemed normal. Charlie would leave early for his job at the bank and always returned at the same time, with a tired smile and a bouquet of flowers for his wife. The neighbors remarked on how lucky I was to have such a devoted husband, and I wanted to believe them. But there were things that didn't add up. Charles never talked about his family. The few times I mentioned meeting his mother, he would quickly brush off the subject, changing the topic. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere, without a past. Moreover, his expression would change when I brought up the basement. He'd press his lips together slightly, his eyes darkening for a brief moment before calmly telling me not to worry. One night I woke to a noise downstairs. I glanced over, but Charles wasn't in bed. My heart raced. I got up slowly, my bare feet barely making a sound on the cold floor. When I reached the kitchen door, I saw a faint light coming from the hallway that led to the basement. I stood frozen, listening to muffled whispers. Then, as if sensing my presence, the light went out. Charles appeared in the darkness, saying he had gone to check a window that was ajar. I knew it was a lie, but I smiled, accepted his words, and went back to bed. With a tight feeling in my chest, the weeks went by as I tried to ignore the signs. I told myself it was just the insecurities of a young, inexperienced woman, but deep down, a part of me already knew something was very wrong in that house. And would you have the courage to ask for the truth? The basement door was always locked, no matter the day, the hour, or my discreet attempts to open it when Charles wasn't home. The doorknob, cold to the touch, wouldn't budge even an inch, and I never saw the key. At first, Charles's explanation seemed enough. He said he kept heavy tools, rusty nails, things that could cause an accident if I touched them without knowing. And I, being a good wife, accepted his reasoning. But it was hard to ignore the chill that ran down my spine every time I passed that door. Something about it felt off out of place. Sometimes while cleaning the house, I found myself staring down the hallway leading to the basement, biting my lip, doubt gnawing at me inside. The afternoons were long and quiet in that house, too big for just the two of us. I rearranged the furniture, washed the curtains, baked cakes that cooled on the counter as I waited for Charles to come home from work. And between one task and another, the locked door seemed to watch me back. One day, while tidying Charles's office, a room I rarely entered at his request, I found a drawer slightly ajar. Inside, among yellowed papers and notebooks, I saw a bunch of keys. My hands trembled as I picked up the largest one, made of heavy metal and showing signs of wear. It was unlike any other key in the house. My first instinct was to quickly slip it into my apron pocket. With my heart pounding in my ears, I returned to the kitchen trying to act natural, but my fingers tingled, torn between the urge to try opening the door and the fear of discovering something I didn't want to know. When night fell, Charles noticed his gaze lingering a second longer on the open drawer. The smile he gave me seemed more tense, as if he were hiding something. "Have you been in my office?" he asked casually while slicing the meat at dinner. I said yes, just cleaning, but my hands were sweaty on the table. He didn't say anything else, just nodded, his eyes holding mine a little too long. That night, when he fell asleep, I got up slowly, the key still in my pocket, and walked barefoot down the dark hallway. Standing before the basement door, I closed my eyes for a second before inserting the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. The cold doorknob gave way under my fingers, and then before I could hesitate, I opened it wide. But what I found down there was not what I'd expected. It was much, much worse. The corridor was wrapped in complete silence and darkness, but the basement door, now slightly open, felt like an invitation I couldn't ignore. The air rising from below was cold and thick, carrying a strange scent, somewhere between mildew and iron. My hands shook so much that I had to grasp the wooden railing tightly just to step down the first stair. The floorboards creaked under every step, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The dim light of the hanging lamp above barely lit part of the staircase, leaving the rest engulfed in deep shadows. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the panic that was building inside me. It was just a basement, maybe old boxes, tools, things like that. That's what I wanted to believe. Even before my feet touched the concrete floor, I heard a baying sound almost like a whisper, woven with words I couldn't quite make out. The air grew heavier, as if the entire house was holding its breath along with me. The lamp flickered faintly, casting flickering shadows on the brick walls. Then, across the basement, behind an old sheet, I saw some kind of metallic structure, something I couldn't identify. Slowly, I edged closer, my bare feet scraping the cold floor, and with a trembling tug, I pulled back the cloth. It was a small, narrow cage with thick bars, stained with something dark. Inside were crumpled papers, scraps of fabric, and worst of all, scratch marks etched into the metal walls. My hands flew to my mouth instinctively to stifle the scream that threatened to escape. The whisper returned now clearer, coming from some dark spot farther ahead. An intermittent murmur, as if someone were speaking with their lips pressed together. I gripped the old flashlight hanging on the wall, my fingers slick with sweat. The weak beam swept across the basement, revealing more boxes, dusty shelves, and a smaller door, nearly hidden behind bags of potatoes. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to take another step. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a tiny cubicle as dark as night. The smell of iron grew stronger, almost metallic, burning my nostrils, and then I heard a low, weak moan as if each word took enormous effort. "Help me." My body froze. It couldn't be. This couldn't be happening. But before I could react, heavy footsteps echoed from above. The basement door slammed shut with a dry thud muffling any sound, and there in complete darkness I realized I was trapped. Now, looking back, I wonder if I should have ignored everything from the very beginning. Sometimes the fear of the unknown is the only thing that keeps a life intact. After that night in the basement, my days became a series of uneasy silences. Charles acted as if nothing had happened. Every morning he would sit at the table with the newspaper spread out, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, talking about trivial things like the weather or market prices, but his eyes never met mine. I tried to stick to the routine, pretending I didn't notice his subtle glances whenever I passed by in the hallway. The basement key had vanished, as if it had never existed. Asking about it felt risky, so I kept my questions to myself, dwelling on them during the long, empty afternoons. But the house on Magnolia Street seemed to be built on secrets, and the unexpected visit on a gray Wednesday proved that. I was peeling potatoes for dinner when I heard the doorbell. I remember drying my hands on my apron, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling in my stomach. When I opened the door, I was faced with two men I had never seen before. They both wore dark coats damp from the drizzle and felt hats. The older one had deep wrinkles around his eyes, while the younger one carried a leather briefcase under his arm. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Is Charles home?" asked the older man, his voice hoarse with an accent I couldn't place. "He's at work," I replied, holding the door open just a crack. "Can I help you with something?" They exchanged quick glances before the older one cleared his throat. "We're his brothers. You can tell him we stopped by." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Brothers? In all his years of marriage, Charles had never mentioned any family, much less brothers. I opened my mouth to ask more, but the younger one cut me off, handing me a card with a handwritten address. "Tell him to get in touch with us. It's urgent." Then, before I could ask anything else, they walked away down the sidewalk, their shoes clicking on the wet pavement. I stood in the doorway, gripping the card between my fingers, my heart pounding wildly. When Charles arrived that night, his lips were tight beneath his coat, his eyes scanning the floor for something before they met mine. I didn't wait for him to settle in. "Your brothers were here," I blurted out, handing him the card. His face went pale in a way I had never seen before. He took the paper with stiff hands, fingers trembling. For a moment I thought he would deny everything, but instead he took a deep breath and looked away. "They shouldn't have come," he murmured, almost to himself. The question escaped my lips before I could stop it. "Charles, do you have brothers?" He looked at me, then his eyes darkening, and replied with a coldness that chilled me, "I do, but it's better if you don't know about them." That night he didn't sleep in the bed. He stayed locked in the office until dawn. As I tossed and turned among the sheets, unable to shake the feeling that the truth was about to surface, the silence in that house became unbearable. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains seemed to hide something. Charlie left before dawn and returned late, his face growing more weary each day. The shadows under his eyes revealed sleepless nights, but he refused to speak about anything except work. The keys to the basement once kept in the office had disappeared. I searched silently through papers and drawers, but the feeling of being watched never left me. It was as if the walls had eyes, alert to every movement. Then, on a rainy Thursday, everything changed. I was changing the bed linens when something fell from the inside pocket of Charles's coat, carelessly thrown on the chair. A small silver key worn from use. My heart raced. I glanced at the door to make sure I was alone, then picked it up with trembling fingers. Minutes later, I was standing in front of the basement door again. The air felt colder, almost biting. The key slid into the lock with a soft click, and the doorknob turned with a low creak. The stairs spiraled down, swallowed by darkness, but this time I didn't hesitate. Each step creaked beneath my bare feet. The lamp hanging from the ceiling barely lit the corners, casting deep shadows along the walls. I took a deep breath and moved forward, letting the dim light guide me to the bottom. So I saw hanging on rusty hooks there were women's clothes, simple floral dresses covered in dust, and something darker beside them. A shelf displayed glass jars filled with mysterious liquids, their faded labels marked with old dates. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst was on the floor, among piles of old newspapers and yellowed photographs, their worn edges showing women I had never seen before. Women smiling, posing in front of gardens, holding flowers. On the back of each delicate handwriting noted names and dates. Among them a standout photo, unframed, looked more recent. The woman in the picture wore a light blue dress, her hair tied in a delicate bun. The shy smile seemed eerily familiar. I felt my blood run cold as I turned the photo over and saw the date penciled on the back, January 1956. That was the month Charles and I got married. A sound behind me made me freeze. The scream caught in my throat as I suddenly turned and found Charles at the bottom of the stairs, his tall silhouette outlined in the dim light. His eyes were darker, fixed on the photo in my hands. He sighed deeply and wearily, running a hand through his hair as if trying to buy time. "You shouldn't be here, Mag." His voice was low, cold, almost a whisper. I instinctively stepped back, stumbling over a wooden box. The smell of dust and iron seemed stronger, numbing my senses. "What does this mean, Charles? Who are these women?" My voice was shaky, almost a whisper, but he just closed the door behind him, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Let's talk upstairs." The words felt more like an order than a request, making it clear that running away wasn't an option. My hands trembled so much that the photo slipped from my grip and fell at his feet. In that moment, I was certain that nothing in that house was as I had imagined. Charles said nothing until we reached the living room. He turned on the lamp beside the sofa, casting soft circles of light that seemed to deepen the silence around us. I sat on the nearest armchair, my hands clenched tightly in my lap to hide the trembling I couldn't control. The photo still burned in my mind. The woman in the blue dress, so much like me, and those cursed dates. Charles stood by the window, his broad back blocking the little light that filtered in from outside. The dark coat seemed like an extension of his shadow, heavy and threatening. He rubbed his face with a weary slowness, as if bearing the weight of the world on his shoulders. "You shouldn't have gone into the basement. It didn't have to end like this." His voice was low, almost a tired whisper. "It didn't have to be this way." My own voice answered, my eyes burning. "Charles, who are those women? And why is there a photo of me down there?" He slowly met my gaze, his eyes cold enough to send a shiver down my spine. "They're not what you think. I was trying to protect both of us." Those words made me laugh, a sharp, almost hysterical sound that bounced off the empty walls. "Protect? Do you have any idea how insane that excuse sounds? Charles, stored dresses, photos, a locked basement. You expect me to believe this is about protecting me?" The words tumbled out, fueled by growing desperation. He sighed again, wearing that expression of endless exhaustion. His eyes darkened even more, the blue fading into shadow. They were past relationships, nothing more than that. Women from before you. His answer should have eased something inside me, but it only deepened the chill. For a moment I went silent, trying to process it all. "So why keep the photos, the dresses?" I pressed, my voice trembling. Charles looked away, his fingers tapping restlessly on the sofa's arm as if searching for a reason even he couldn't find. "Because..." He hesitated, and that pause felt endless. "Because I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. It was a mistake. I know that, but you wouldn't understand. Try." The word came out sharp, filled with a resentment I hadn't even realized I had. "Make me understand, Charles." But he just rubbed his face again, turned toward the kitchen, and said nothing more. The door closed softly behind him, leaving me alone in the room, my eyes burning with tears I refused to shed. The clock on the wall seemed to mark the seconds with loud ticks while the darkness outside crept in around the house. I stood there, hugging myself, struggling to make sense of Charles's hollow answers, as the crushing feeling of living a lie gripped my chest. What else was he hiding? And how deep did the lies of the man I called my husband go? That night dragged on like an endless nightmare. After Charlie locked himself in the office, silence took over the house. I wandered through the dark hallways, the soft glow from the lamps casting long shadows on the walls. Each step seemed to echo too loudly, as if the house had been empty for years. I couldn't sleep. The pillow felt like it was filled with stones, and the bed was ice cold. The images from the basement kept spinning in my mind, the dresses hanging, the yellowed photographs, the rusted cage, and worst of all, the photo of the woman in the blue dress with a date that matched my wedding day. The more I thought about it, the more fear grew, tightening my chest until I could barely breathe. Early in the morning, I went down to the kitchen, hoping to find some peace in a cup of hot tea. My hands were still shaking as I lit the stove. The kettle hissed like a muffled scream. I was so distracted that I didn't notice Charlie's presence until I saw him reflected in the window glass, standing in the doorway like a dark shadow. I couldn't sleep. His voice was low and hoarse, but his eyes looked like two black slits. Under the dim light, I didn't respond, just kept stirring the tea with the spoon, the metal clinking filling the heavy silence. Charlie sighed, running his hand through his hair. "Maggie, listen to me. I was just trying to keep you from..." He hesitated, searching for words that seemed to escape him. "From knowing too much. Some things are better left forgotten." Forgotten? I dropped the spoon harder than I meant to, the sharp sound echoing through the kitchen. "We've been married 6 years, Charlie. How can you expect me to forget?" He looked away, gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles went white, because it's not safe. "Not for you or for me." The words came out through clenched teeth, heavy with a palpable tension. Fear mixed with anger churned in my stomach. Safe from whom? Charlie? From your brothers showing up unannounced? Or from the women in the basement? The bitter tone of my voice made him raise his eyes. Suddenly the muscles in his jaw tightened. He seemed to be fighting something inside, his shoulders weighed down by the invisible burden of the secrets he held. And then, almost in a whisper, he said, "They are neither my brothers nor those women." His voice faltered and he ran his hand over his tired face. "Those women didn't deserve what happened." The air seemed to leave my lungs. The words got stuck in my throat as the clock's hands moved slowly, marking each second of that deadly silence. "What did you do, Charles?" My voice was so low I could hardly believe I had spoken. But he didn't answer. He just turned away, leaving me alone with a cold teapot and an emptiness so vast it felt impossible to fill. I spent the rest of the night in the armchair, in the living room, watching the shadows stretch and the morning light creep through the curtains. And for the first time, I feared the dawn. Dawn arrived pale and cold, wrapping the house in an even heavier silence. Charles wasn't in bed when I woke up, nor anywhere else in the house. His absence felt heavier than his presence, leaving every room empty and lifeless. The newspapers were still piled on the porch, and the car keys hung on the hook as usual. It was as if he had vanished. I thought about calling the police, but his words kept echoing in my mind. "It's not safe, not for you or for me." Whatever that meant, I knew I couldn't trust anyone anymore. I spent hours searching for some explanation, going through the office again, flipping through notebooks, old letters, anything that might offer a clue. Then I found tucked between 2 pages of a dusty book, a yellowed envelope without a recipient, only a date. February 1955, 1 year before I met Charles. My trembling hands carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in Charles's familiar, deliberate script. The first lines made my heart freeze. "If you're reading this, it's because the truth can no longer be hidden. I tried to protect you, Maggie, but some things can never be buried forever." I kept reading, my blood pounding in my ears as each sentence hit like a blow. The letter spoke of old debts, broken promises, and a shattered family. Charles confessed to being involved in something dark, a society that controlled far more than just local businesses. They dealt in money, influence, and people. But the worst came at the end. The women you encountered, they weren't strangers. They were witnesses, and I never wanted you to know that. The words blurred before my eyes as I gripped the paper tightly, my fingers turning white. Witnesses, missing women kept hidden in that basement like haunting memories of something that should never have surfaced. The creak of the door snapped me out of my trance. I stood up abruptly, my legs weak, my heart pounding. Charles was standing in the doorway, a defeated look on his face, his eyes sunken as if he hadn't slept in days. "You shouldn't have found that." His voice was low, almost a whisper of regret. "Witnesses?" I whispered, the letter trembling in my hands. You heard them." He seemed to collapse before me, his shoulders slumping, his lips trembling. "It wasn't me." His voice was hoarse, begging me to believe him. "I was just trying to cover things up so they wouldn't come after you." They? I spat the word, stepping back. Who are they? I looked down as if speaking might somehow be more dangerous than silence. We need to get out of here now. He stepped forward, hand reaching out, but I instinctively pulled away, fear turning into anger. Tell the truth, I yelled, my voice echoing off the walls like a gunshot. If you want me to come with you, tell me who these people are. Who are these women? Charles paused, closing his eyes for a moment that felt impossibly long. When he looked back at me, there was a deep sorrow in his blue eyes. If I tell you, they'll find us, and then, Maggie, not even the sky will be enough to save us. The words caught in my throat, and before I could say anything, the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside broke the silence. 3 black cars pulled up in front of the house, their doors opening in unison. Men in dark coats stepped out, their faces expressionless, while Charles turned pale in a way I'd never seen before. Too late, he whispered, his voice barely audible. The clock on the wall seemed to slow with every tick, each one a reminder that nothing would ever be the same again. I pressed the letter to my chest, eyes fixed on the men advancing across the porch, knowing that the truth was about to be revealed, whether I was ready or not. The pounding on the door echoed through the house like thunder, each knock louder and more insistent than the last. I instinctively recoiled, my back pressing against the cold wall. Charles, his face pale and eyes wide, peered through the slightly pulled back curtain at the line of black cars parked outside. Mag, listen to me, he whispered, his voice barely more than a plea. Don't open the door no matter what happens. If they get in, you run, okay? I should have obeyed, should have locked myself away somewhere, but my legs felt frozen to the floor. I couldn't shake the images of the basement, the photos, the dresses hanging like ghosts, and worst of all, the letter with that unfinished confession crumpled in my hand. The click of the doorknob shattered my thoughts. The door creaked open, and 3 men entered, filling the room with a heavy presence. The oldest of them, with graying hair and a dark overcoat, partial commanding, their leader. His eyes scanned the room like a predator who knows their prey has nowhere to run. Graham spoke slowly, savoring the moment, pausing for effect, as if it was going to get better. Let's settle this once and for all, don't you think? Charles swallowed hard, sweat shining on his forehead. He raised his hands in a near appeasing gesture, but his fingers trembled. She doesn't know anything, he murmured weakly. Please keep her out of this. The man in the overcoat smiled, a cold, calculated smile. Now it's too late for that, don't you think? He gave a subtle signal, and the other 2 stepped forward, shoving Charles against the wall. My throat burned with a stifled scream. My legs moved on their own, but before I could react, one of the men's strong hands gripped my shoulders, dragging me to the nearest chair. The hard wood pressed into my back, but the pain felt distant compared to the overwhelming panic that had me gasping for breath. Let's make this simple, Mrs. Graham. The man in the overcoat started, adjusting his gloves with an almost cruel calm. Your husband has some debts to settle. If you cooperate, nothing bad will happen to you. His eyes slowly shifted from me to Charles, who was struggling against the 2 men, his wrists held tight. No, Maggie, don't say anything, he shouted, his voice hoarse with desperation, but the man's gaze locked onto mine again, cold as ice. The choice is yours, he said, tilting his head as if offering a fair deal. Either you talk or he pays the price, and don't worry, we won't do anything too painful. Tears stung my eyes, my vision blurring between fear and anger. I had no idea what they wanted to know or how much time I had before something worse happened. Then a soft sound broke the silence, the clink of metal hitting the floor. Charles had managed to free himself, if only for a moment, and the gun slipped from his waist, spinning to a stop right in front of me. The man in the trench coat raised an eyebrow, his smile fading. Well, looks like your husband still has some fight left in him. Panic surged through me. Before I could think, I leaned forward, fingers closing around the cold grip. My hands shook as I aimed, my arms feeling like they weighed a ton. Let him go, I demanded, my voice shaky, almost unrecognizable. The men hesitated, eyes fixed on the gun, but the leader merely sighed, crossing his arms. And what do you plan to do, Maggie? Shoot? There was pure disbelief in his tone. My hands trembled so much that my fingers slipped on the trigger. The weight of the decision was overwhelming. Guilt throbbed at my temples. Charles, breathing heavily, looked at me with an expression that broke something inside me. Not fear, but pure regret. "I'm sorry, Maggie," he whispered, and before I could react, he lunged at one of the men, the impact sending everyone stumbling back. The chaos that followed was a blur of shouts, hurried footsteps, and the sound of things crashing. When the dust settled, the men were fleeing through the door, leaving only the echo of screeching tires on the asphalt. Charles collapsed on the ground, weakly breathing, looked at me with a half-sad smile, his eyes glistening. "I just wanted to keep you safe," he murmured, his voice barely audible. I ran to him, my knees hitting the cold ground, tears streaming freely. I squeezed his hand tightly, sobs uncontrollably escaping, but his smile slowly faded, life slipping away with each word. "Forgive me, Maggie, But how could I forgive someone who had destroyed everything? How could I forgive someone who had hidden so many lies, so many horrors in the basement of our home? His grip loosened, his blue eyes slowly closing. The last thing I heard was the relentless ticking of the clock on the wall, marking the seconds of a silence I could never break. After that night when Charles died in my arms, the house on Magnolia Street felt even darker, as if the secrets inside had grown heavier. The police asked a few quick questions, took the body and closed the case, treating it like a settling of scores involving old debts. But nothing explained the photos in the basement, the clothes of missing women, or especially the whisper I heard behind that smaller hidden door. I knew I had to go back there. I needed to uncover the truth before it died along with Charles. One gray morning, my heart pounding so hard it seemed to echo off the walls, I descended to the basement one last time. The smaller door was still ajar, like a sinister invitation. The flashlight trembled in my hands as I moved slowly, my footsteps echoing on the cold concrete floor. It was only when I heard again a low, almost imperceptible moan that I realized I wasn't alone. Behind rusted bars in a dark corner of the basement was an improvised cell made of roughly welded metal bars, and inside, chained by the wrists, was a man. His skin was pale, his face hidden by tangled hair, clothes dusty and dirty, but his deep, frightened eyes met mine with desperate urgency. You need to get out of here." His voice was hoarse, faltering, as if each word took enormous effort. My heart froze. It was Andrew, Charles's twin brother, but his expression wasn't one of threat. It was pure terror. What? What happened to you?" I asked in a trembling whisper, fingers gripping the flashlight like it was my only lifeline. Andrew shut his eyes, his face etched with pain. "Charles, he locked me in here years ago. He said it was to protect me. He said," his voice breaking almost into a sob, They wanted to use me. The men in the black cars, the same ones who killed Charles." The realization hit me like a lightning strike. "They were after you?" I whispered, eyes wide. Andrew nodded slowly, the chains having left wounds on his wrists. "Charlie knew too much," he murmured, his gaze vacant. "Our father was involved." A circle. "They used the family fortune to fund dirty business. When our father died, they tried to force me to carry on. I tried to tell everything but Charles." My voice faltered again, my eyes filling with bitter tears. "Charles said it was too dangerous, that they would kill anyone who knew, so he locked me in here." The shock made me step back, my back hitting the cold wall. Charles wasn't protecting his brother, he was protecting himself. If the men from the circle found out Andrew was still alive and knew the secrets, they would kill everyone. The women in the basement weren't killed by Andrew, but to cover up the Graham family's web of influence. The men in the black cars weren't Andrew's allies. They were executioners sent by the circle to erase any trace that could expose their crimes. They killed Charles because he knew too much, and now if they found Andrew, they're coming back, Andrew whispered, eyes wide. "They can't know I'm alive." My hand shook so much the lantern nearly fell. There was no time. I searched the shelves for a tool, anything to cut the chains, but footsteps upstairs interrupted my thoughts. Firm, cold steps echoed slowly. "Andrew," a voice whispered, barely audible. "Please, go away." Fear seemed to freeze my legs, but something stronger kept me rooted. I found a crowbar among the old tools, my fingers still sweaty, and I forced the chains with all the strength I could muster. The metal creaked a crack too loud in the heavy silence. "Come on, let's get out of here," I murmured, my voice faltering, eyes locked on Andrew's. The lock finally gave way, falling with a dry thud. Andrew stumbled out of the cell, his knees buckling, and I supported him as best I could. We hurried down the narrow hallway, but before we could reach the stairs, the basement door swung open with a bang. Men in overcoats, faces hidden, the same men who had killed Charles. The leader stepped forward slowly, eyes gleaming in the dim light. Well, well, so this is where the last Graham is hiding?" His voice was low, almost amused. "This is going to be easier than I thought." Despair exploded in my chest, my eyes darting from Andrew to the armed men. There was no escape, no mercy. In a desperate impulse, I pushed Andrew back my feet, searching for anything that could be used as a weapon, anything to buy us some time. Charles's words echoed in my mind. "Run, trust no one." The shots pierced the air, sharp and loud. The last thing I remember was the look of horror in Andrew's eyes as blood pooled on the concrete floor. After that terrible night at the Magnolia Street house, I thought I'd never see the light of day again, but somehow both Andrew and I survived. The men left, believing they had silenced all the secrets. Andrew was wounded but alive, and together we managed to escape that cursed house. In the days that followed, I burned letters, photos, and everything that remained of that family's sins. Not to hide it, but to finally leave the past behind. I handed a letter over to the police recounting everything I knew as a final act of justice for the women who lost their lives in silence. Then I moved to a new city where no one knew my name. Over time, I found a simple job, and gradually, the shadows began to fade. Life was never the same, but I learned that surviving is an act of courage. The scars remained, but each dawn felt like a new chance to start over. The house on Magnolia Street was demolished years later, taking away all the horrors it held. The circle of powerful men fell apart, and somehow justice was served. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Today, looking back, I know that the truth can hurt, but it also sets you free. And as long as there is a new dawn, there will always be hope. So if you've made it this far, thank you for listening to this story. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from.